Sitting next to me, on my left, is Jeff Toogood, and Jeff is the founder of CrazySocks4Docs Day. He's a cardiologist at Peninsula Health and in private practice. He's also a board member of Southwest Healthcare, ambassador for Beyond Blue, and ambassador for Masters Swimming Victoria. We love healthy pursuits. In fact, I think I rang you the other day and you were right in the middle of doing something with life-saving, and your daughters. Yes, and your daughter is here in the audience to support you. Well done, Millie. We love family support. Jeff founded CrazySocks4Docs to create awareness about doctors' mental health and to break the stigma surrounding the issue. And just last week, as the Minister said, he was awarded the AMA's prestigious President's Award for his contribution to raising mental health issues amongst doctors. So congratulations and welcome to Jeff. Next to you is, now I understand, I didn't learn to speak Japanese at school, but Yumiko Kadota, known to her friends as Miko, and you graduated from the University of New South Wales in 2010. You've worked as a plastic surgery registrar when you got burnt out, and you eventually resigned in June last year, so it's pretty fresh for you. In fact, it's even fresher because your health continued to deteriorate and you were hospitalised in October last year. I'm going to let you tell more about your story, but if anyone wants to read it, The Ugly Side of Becoming a Surgeon is Miko's blog site. Please feel free to go and have a look at that. And of course, at the end is our fabulous international guest, Dr. Michael Myers. He's Professor of Clinical Psychiatry at, is it SUNY?
SUNY.
SUNY, Downstate Medical Centre in Brooklyn, New York. He's a specialist physician in health, and he's also the author or co-author of 150 scientific publications and 8 books, the most recent of which I have right here, which is Why Physicians Die by Suicide, Lessons Learned from Their Families and Others Who Cared. And The Physician as a Patient, a clinical handbook of for mental health professionals with Dr. Glenn Gabbard. He treated his first physician patient on Christmas Day 1970, and his experience launched a decade-long career helping ailing physicians and their families. This continues to today. And he's passionate about advocacy for the rights of physicians and serves on multiple boards and committees, and he's also on committees of medical associations. He pens a monthly blog. Where's the blog? Where do people find the blog?
It's called Psychiatry...
Google, Dr. Michael Myers blog.
Yeah, that's the easier way to get to it.
You are over here to talk about this issue, and it's absolutely wonderful to have you here. Please put your hands together for Michael.
Thank you, everyone. Happy to be here.
Someone who you can't see but you're about to hear from is Dr. Kate Harding. Now, Kate is not with us. She's in England. We couldn't organise, because of time zones and all sorts of reasons, to have her live, but Kate actually prepared something earlier for us. She's a palliative care doctor and part-time GP and hospice doctor in Hereford Hospital in the UK. After several years working in Australia and New Zealand, she's also worked in New Zealand. I said that. And she blogs regularly for the GP publication Pulse and has written extensively for print version of Pulse in the past, as well as for New Zealand Doctor in New Zealand. She has 2 children. I'm going to let her tell you her story.
Hello, my name is Kate Harding. I'm a palliative care doctor and GP in Herefordshire here in the UK. I am talking to you today because I lost my husband, Richard, in October 2017, on the 23rd of October. He was a consultant anaesthetist and intensivist, and he took his own life as a result of a severe depression. At the time, we were living in New Zealand, in Whangarei, 2 hours north of Auckland, and his case became fairly well known, I think, within New Zealand and to some extent in Australia, because it was so shocking, and also because I wrote about it in the aftermath and have always been happy to talk openly about what happened, in an effort to try to contribute to the conversations that are increasingly being heard about doctor wellbeing and mental health issues, and also because part of the trigger for Richard's depression was his first ever complaint made against him to the General Medical Council here in the UK, just as we prepared to emigrate to New Zealand at the end of 2015. Richard was a very well-liked, very competent doctor, known for his clinical acumen and his decisiveness. He was very direct, he was very down to earth, and he had a great relationship with his colleagues, and also really enjoyed his relationship with his patients. He was very dedicated. The complaint that he received absolutely threw him, and although it was thrown out, as luckily most complaints against us doctors are, and he was exonerated from any wrongdoing, the effect on his personality and his mood lasted far longer than the process of the complaint, the procedure triggered by the complaint itself. In other words, when he got the letter of exoneration, it's not like his mood immediately lifted and everything was fine again. The damage went much deeper than that and was much more long-lasting. And that's what I personally hadn't appreciated about complaints before seeing the effects of them close up. So that's another reason that I talk about Richard's death, because I really want it to be understood by society, really, at large, what happens when you complain about a doctor. Even though, as we all know, there has to be a complaint procedure. We all understand that. We are patients ourselves as well as healthcare professionals. But the way that complaints are handled has to change, because doctors are very vulnerable at that time in their career, at that time in their life. And no doctor that I know takes a complaint lightly. And the effects are really, they're very dramatic often. Richard's self-confidence plummeted, his anxiety levels soared. He just wasn't the same person. The fact that somebody had felt moved by how strongly they felt about his doctoring to complain about him at the highest level to the General Medical Council, he never really recovered from that shock. And as we know, as doctors, we not only have to live with the possibility of being complained at any time, we also have to live with our mistakes, whether they lead to a complaint or not. And I think most of us hope that the good that we do as doctors outweighs the bad. But of course, if you make a mistake as part of your doctoring, when you make a mistake as part of your doctoring, they can be very harmful, occasionally fatal, and that is a huge burden to live with. Another risk factor, I think, was the fact that I was medical. I think that had I been a layperson, his fleeting suicidal thoughts, as I thought they were, expressed to me just now and again, would have really frightened me. As it was, I wasn't pleased to hear about them, of course, but and I was worried by that. But as a doctor with, ironically, an interest in mental health, I've been told by my patients about their suicidal thoughts hundreds, probably thousands of times, certainly hundreds of times over the years.
Jeff, is Kate's story something that, obviously you know this woman, and is this the sort of thing that is happening and we don't even hear about?
Yes, it is. I think it is a story that's happening a lot. I think Kate brings up, Michael might want to talk about it.
Yeah, I was going to ask Michael, but first I wanted you to tell us,
Yep.
Why did you do this?
The Crazy Socks. Well, I started the Crazy Socks, as I said before. I bought a dog for therapy. He's a golden retriever, so kind of similar. Beautiful complexion, but and I had a limited number of colourful socks that I already bought. Ironically, happy socks. Then he went through my laundry basket, had these 2 odd socks, went to work. I won't say not at the hospital there, but another institution, and was kind of vilified a little bit behind my back. My mental health was going off, but in fact I'd recovered. I was recovering, and it was only because I wore odd socks. Ironically, now you can go into stores and buy mismatched socks, so I just got in front of the marketing. And then I thought that was really stigmatising. I wanted a way to break the stigma around mental health. You're superficially judging someone just because of their socks, rather than their behaviour. And I think for me in medicine, stigma about mental health and your own mental health and the stigma you get from your own medical professionals around you is probably worse than in most other professions in society.
I have to commend you on your incredible courage to speak up about your own personal issues. And, you can, if you want to share, we'd love to hear your story. Because one of the things, and I'll probably come to you, Michael, on this one, which is doctors fear the reaction they're going to get from their colleagues if they speak up about problems, which is sort of kind of counterproductive.
Yes, it's very counterproductive. I think what that is about is the long history in medicine of where we just had to keep all of this to ourselves. And thank goodness for people like Jeff, many of you who are speaking openly. That makes such a difference to really just bring it out in the open that we're human too. And so the problem, though, is that there still is, in some circles, a certain amount of judgment. And I think each of you have felt that in your own stories with your self-disclosure.
Did you want to tell any more of your story, Jeff, at all? Or have you feel you've told it enough?
Maybe I've told enough, probably. I don't know. Maybe I've told enough, but I was severely...
I don't think you have.
Well, I don't know. Okay. But I've got my mother and my daughter here. But anyway, they know as well. I was very sick, had intense suicidal thoughts.
And that must be very confronting. I'm sorry, Millie. That must be very confronting for you to hear.
She's heard this story before.
Of course she has.
Yeah. And she knows I'm well. And, we just went out to Harry Potter and the Cursed Child last night and had a pretty cool time. And look, in some ways, it might be confronting for her to hear it, but in another way, it's not, because it means there's always hope, and there's always, you can always recover. So if they ever get into a dark place, they know that, there's always help, there's always somewhere to go. As a doctor, though, I delayed getting help because I felt stigmatised within, partly because I'm a middle-aged man, also I'm a middle-aged male doctor, and you're meant to be bulletproof. But also the kind of fear of being stigmatised around, and the privacy of going to the clinics, the privacy of seeing doctors, because as soon as your medical condition will be fleeted around the world very quickly, as you probably realise.
And when you do, now that you are well, go back to work, do people, the medical profession should know better, but do people still say, oh, you've got a mental illness?
In some places they do. I'm lucky to have a great CEO. I acknowledge her. She's fantastic. But I think some people still do, and they still will make judgment on very superficial mistakes, superficial things, things that would be let go for someone else. So spelling mistakes in letters and things will be implicated as you're going off, rather than the spell check's not worked in the computer.
You do a lot of public speaking.
Yep.
What do doctors say to you after you've spoken?
After the talks, you get not many questions during the talks, but after the talks you get many people coming up to you and saying, thank you for speaking, thank you for giving. And in fact, on Saturday night after the award, numerous people came up and told me their story, and they said they wouldn't have the courage, or they feared speaking about their own story.
Michael, how powerful are the stories?
Extremely powerful. Jeff, you just hit the nail on the head with that. That's been my experience as well when I've worked with panels like we're doing today, is that at the end, people do come up, they exchange emails because they realize, I'm not alone with this. And as you hear, Jeff, you mentioned, I don't maybe have the courage that you do to speak openly about it, but can we keep in touch? Or do you have any suggestions with regard to this in my home community?
And the role of social media, obviously, it was demonised. People were being trolled, and we'll come to that in a minute, Miko. But I've seen the support group on Twitter especially. Can we harness social media this way?
Oh, I think this is one of the beautiful and positive things about it, that people are connecting online, because sometimes the community in which you live might be small, or there aren't other individuals, so there's all kinds of online groups. We've had those for some time, actually, and so they're really cutting barriers, and I believe, slowly chipping away at stigma. in the House of Medicine.
And can I ask also, Michael, before we go to Miko, with Kate's story, I'm sure that will resonate very much with you and the topic of your book.
Yes.
I was particularly moved by her comments about, I'm a medical doctor, I didn't recognise the signs in my husband.
Yes. Yeah, and see, that's a good example of our being in medicine doesn't really give us immunity, because the type of relationship that we have with a loved one is in so many respects so different than when we're doing our so-called clinical work, where we have that measure of objectivity or experience or just perhaps even just some sort of shield or whatever from the powerful emotions that, that can occur when, you know, when a loved one is actually expressing frightening thoughts. And I wanted to speak to Kate as if she's in this room, because Kate, I felt your presence. I was so delighted to meet Kate in person last fall at the International Wounded Healer Conference in the UK, but also to have a long extended telephone interview with her. And I salute the work that she's doing so much. But what she's describing, though, is really very common in the research I did for my book on physician suicide, interviewing families. So many of them said this, and the problem with that, of course, is that the aftermath is so painful, because there's always guilt after losing a loved one to suicide, but it can be especially high in us. And I've seen that in psychiatrists who have lost a loved one to suicide, because, you know, we're the experts, so to speak, and that this occurred on my watch. It's very, very hard, but it takes time. And also speaking out what Kate is doing, it's so wonderful and so important and life-saving.
Well, Katie's watching on Facebook, and
Yes.
I've just had a message from her saying, dog therapy alive and well here too. Mine is on the left. She sent a photo. So Katie's watching and listening. Hello, Kate. Miko, let's go to you. And your story, you're a new doctor compared to us crusties. Tell us your story.
I'm older than I look. So I was PGY8 working as a plastic surgery registrar, and I think that when we talk about stigma, I think surgery is notorious for the culture of being tough, and the person who can do the most hours is the strongest, and so there's this perception that if you have a mental illness, it signifies a weakness in your character, and that's something that I fought a lot with as well. And so I had done about 4 months in this particular hospital, and I was on call 10 days out of 14 every fortnight, and I felt like I couldn't speak out because I didn't want my consultants to think that I wasn't coping with the job or that I wasn't competent. And I also, in myself, didn't recognise the symptoms, and I think that I'm an example of someone who may have an atypical presentation of mental illness, in that I didn't come across as the typical Eeyore that we often see, analogous to depression. I was always chirpy and outgoing, and even this year I've had messages from my colleagues saying, I had no idea you were going through a tough time. So I often say, ask your strong friend how they're doing, because a lot of people put on a veneer for the outside world and you have no idea what's going on inside. And the other thing I want to say is the word burnout. I have had some criticism for using that word, because there is a bit of a victim blaming connotation using that word, and so there have been suggestions about using the word moral injury instead. I personally use the word burnout because I wasn't ready to tell the world my real struggle, and I'll try not to get teary.
It's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
It's okay to not be okay, but
You know what? You know what's really important? That, and I think, and especially it's a girl thing, and I say that advisedly. Sometimes, and I think with blokes too, sometimes the tears just come and it doesn't reflect what you're thinking on the inside. So go right ahead. We'll cry with you.
I wasn't expecting to cry, but So I was told that the day I resigned was actually CrazySocks4Docs Day, and I didn't even know it at the time. I was so deliriously exhausted that I didn't even know what day it was or what month it was. I was just working, and it was my 24th day in a row, and it happened to be June the 1st last year that I resigned. And then it was a week after that I got diagnosed with depression, and that's something that I've really struggled with, especially because of the culture that we're in, and I think that I'm also guilty of holding that perception of mental illness. And
Not guilty. Don't use the G word.
yeah, okay, I won't use the G word, but I had to fight my own prejudices against the mental illness because I had never been. I've not had a history of mental illness before, and so for me to accept it was really difficult, especially coming from the surgical fraternity. So,
Were you worried that if you spoke up, you may not get on the program?
absolutely, yeah, and that's why I held off for such a long time, and it really took a lot for me to walk away from something that I really wanted to do, and a lot of people have asked, why were you hospitalised in October when you resigned in June? And I think a lot of it was because I was still in denial that I had a mental illness. And so, just take a breath.
You take a rest.
I'm okay.
And Miko, did that come across as a criticism?
No,
Like,
it was
why were you
definitely not a...
hospitalized in October?
No, it wasn't a criticism. It was more like a curiosity. Like,
okay.
So what happened in the 4 months between June and October? And I think the truth is that I was in denial. I didn't want to accept that I had a mental illness. I just wanted to. I just thought I was really, really tired and burnt out. I didn't want to.
I think it's symptomatic of the medical profession at large, and Michael, and in fact, anyone, any of you can ask this.
In fact, that's why I jumped in, because I've heard this from some of my physician patients that they've been criticized for the course of it or something. Like, aren't you better yet? Or how come you weren't hospitalized right away then? Or, I mean, just so many, that's why I asked, that's why I used the J word, whether there was some judgment implied there.
And maybe, Miko, what I wanted to ask you was, you were working such long hours, why didn't you go to HR? And I think this is it's a loaded question.
Yeah.
And I think that all of you can probably speak to this.
Yeah.
But you work in a hospital. Public hospitals have a fabulous HR section, and I use that term as it should be used. What's the perception of HR amongst junior and senior doctors?
I guess we don't really think of HR as people that we can report to. So often we think about the head of unit or medical administration who actually, approve the rosters.
And you'd be in real trouble if, in fact, you're trying to get into a specialty and you think the person you go and talk to is your head of unit, but you're not going to go there because you're worried that if you say that to them, you won't get where you want to go.
That's right. And I didn't want to come across like I was doing something behind anyone's back. I was very open about the fact that I thought that my roster was unsafe and it was affecting my ability to do my job. And so, and I was reassured that the roster would change, so I had faith in that.
And this is something that obviously, and the Minister knows about this and the AMA knows about this, but this is something that has to be addressed, which is the workload that doctors are under. We have to keep our public hospitals moving, but not at the expense of our professionals. I'll come back to you about what you're doing now, but Jeff, you were nodding right through that. Would you like to make a comment?
I kind of completely agree with Miko. I mean, I felt the same way, but as an older doctor. Don't worry, I've cried on stage a number of times, let me tell you. Even on the weekend when I got the award, that was kind of emotional, but so that's okay. And yes, I felt the judgment word. And what was the C word?
What?
What was the word you said don't say?
Guilt.
Guilt, yes. Gosh, did I feel guilty about becoming... The guilt I felt about having a mental health issue and having severe depression. And also the same as just Michael said, how come you're not better in 3 weeks? Well, it takes a considerable amount of time.
But, if you'd been in a major road trauma and had multiple fractures and all the rest of it, everyone would be, that's all fine. Michael?
Both of you, as many of you will know, guilt is one of the symptoms of depression, but it's also one of the symptoms of our medical culture. Very few physicians who develop a psychiatric illness don't feel guilty that somehow or whatever they've let down the medical profession, they've let down their colleagues, their branch of medicine or something like that. And the additional piece, I think, for you, Miko, is the residual sexism in branches of medicine, and especially in surgery. As you know, it was male-dominated for decades and decades.
Isn't
And
it
that's
40% of graduates are female and only 4%?
Yeah, it's much
and
higher
anyone
now.
from the College of Surgeons can correct me.
But,
it's only 4%.
Miko, you touched on something. I think what I think you're implying is a fear of disclosure about depression. And as you probably know, many of you, that burnout doesn't have the same degree of stigma associated with it. It's seen as maybe even a badge of honor or something, that you're working your butt off and the system's made you sick. Whereas it's harder to disclose. And I've been diagnosed with depression, and I'm getting treatment for it.
And that's why I chose to use that word burnout, because I wasn't ready to say that I had depression. I didn't want to use the D word.
And you weren't ready because it's scary.
It's really
You're
scary.
not allowed to talk about it.
It's really scary because I didn't accept it in myself. And so that's what took the 4 months. I was in denial that I was actually mentally ill. I had actually applied for jobs. I had a job lined up for the second semester. I thought I'd just have a rest and go back to it. But I just allowed myself to decline until I was rock bottom in October. So that's why there was a delay in me going to hospital.
Michael, the G word, guilt, survivor guilt.
Yes.
And I think we heard a little bit of that from Kate.
Yeah.
And there's a two-part question. The second part to it is, firstly, is that a major problem? And secondly, the families of medical practitioners who are not medical practitioners, we just sort of brush off their concerns and say, look, I've got to work. What would you say to families?
We need you. I have felt that since my career, during training actually, when I did a year of child psychiatry and did a lot of family therapy in that year. And then that translated then into always taking a much more, holistic or familial approach to the individual patient sitting opposite me. And I have found it essential in my work with doctors to involve the family. I see family members of my physician patients as my field team. Those are the individuals who will, obviously with their loved one's permission, will come in or will get in touch with me about their observations and hunches and concerns and worries they have. And they're also hungry for information as to what to watch for. What would I recommend? Why is this happening? So that's the approach I've always taken, and it's especially important in physician health.
And I might throw this open to all of you, but I'll start with you, Michael, which is, what are some practical things that families, how do you say to your father, spouse, brother, sister, mother, you need to get help? Because if you say you need to get help to a medical practitioner, yeah.
Yes. Well, there's obviously many different ways of saying it. As you know, we all have we've got our character armor, we have our defenses. It's pretty hard to admit that. But I think when it's done, sometimes repeatedly, but when and if the individual is getting worse, so I've heard absolutely everything in my practice, where sometimes the spouse has said, look, you get help or I'm out of here. But more often what I would get would be a phone call from a worried loved one, often a spouse, but sometimes a child of a doctor. I'm really worried about my mom. I'm really worried about my dad. I know that you see doctors. Can I tell you a little bit about it? And with that, and they then tell the family member, I called Dr. Myers today. Imagine. And so I said, so look at it. Then if the individual still won't come, let me know, and I'll call them. I've made cold calls before, and I don't do it in an attacking way. I try to do it in an invitational way, that your family's worried about you.
And of course, the thing about that, we all know as medical practitioners, to receive a call from a patient's relative is not breaking confidentiality. We may not be able to talk to them, but they can talk to us.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important for people to know that.
That's right. It's extremely important so that there is an avenue for you to voice your concerns. The other piece of information I've heard from so many families I've spoken to, especially the ones after the loss of someone to suicide, is that they're crying out for information. They make statements like, you people in psychiatry need to teach us more, what to watch for. And this is in the non-psychiatric branches of medicine as well. And this is why I'm appealing to my colleagues in the mental health field, other psychiatrists and other mental health professionals, that we have a duty. There's an imperative here to educate our brothers and sisters in medicine about some of the basics, the ABCs of what to watch for.
Indeed. Here in Australia, we've got a fabulous network of GPs. I'm going to put my two colleagues on the spot. Have you two got a GP?
Yes.
Yes.
Hands up
Yeah.
if you've got a GP in the audience. Hands went up like you would. Oh, I better put mine up. So can I then ask you the practicalities of getting well? What are some personal things that you do, Jeff, to now stay on top of your mental health issues?
I've changed my work-life balance, in inverted commas, but, I had kind of 2 or 3 episodes, probably after the second episode, I actually learned not to go back to working 60 hours a week and being ahead of a department and those sort of silly things. And I went back to working kind of normal working hours for other people, which is kind of a normal working week for most people. Take some time off. I swim a lot, which is my exercise. I cook, which is my mindfulness. I spend time with my children.
You actually have a cook-off with the Attorney General, I believe.
Yeah, we trade recipes, and the local member for Franks, and we sort of up it. No. But I've been a bit busy, but I think you might challenge me. I might have to put a recipe up and tag in Jill.
Yeah, I think you should.
Yeah.
I'll put my crocheted rug up if you put your recipes up.
Okay. And so, spending time with your family, spending time with your children, the sea, the beach, swimming's my kind of
Hobbies and
yes,
family, yeah.
And I follow Dykes.
And running this Crazy Socks for Docs thing. And I suppose one thing, you obviously have to look after yourself. You don't have to take on the world with this. You've got a lot of people around you to help you. Miko, your Twitter handle I think says it all really, Mind Body Miko. Tell us how you stay on top of your mental health.
These are things that I started doing well before I even got sick. So I've just been continuing my lifestyle that I had before, which is to make sure I have good nutrition, sleep well, exercise.
All the things that we tell people to do. You are wonderful
all
to
of
put
the
those
things.
in practice.
And last year I became a yoga teacher, and that has deepened my own personal practice of yoga. And yoga is something that I've been doing since I was an intern. So if I can move the topic to protective factors of...
To which, sorry?
Protective.
Yes,
protective. So whenever I think about mental health, I think of that. I don't know whether you still use it when you teach, but that 3x3 grid about biopsychosocial,
Yes.
and then precipitating, predisposing, precipitating, and perpetuating.
Right.
And I think about
protective.
that grid a lot, and then
Yes.
the protective factors. And the thing is, I had all of the protective factors and I still became unwell.
But you did, but you were working so hard, and probably sleep deprivation and all
Exactly.
of those extraneous things were probably working against all the fabulous protective factors that you put in place.
Absolutely, and that's the thing that I wanted to stress, is that even if you do follow all the advices about protective factors, there are still precipitating and perpetuating factors that are outside of you, that are outside of your control, and that can be your work environment.
I'm very conscious of time, and I definitely wanted people in the audience to have some take-home messages. Michael, you've said over and over again that we must be our brothers and sisters' keepers in medicine. What do you actually mean by that, and why is it important?
It's absolutely essential. I think I've hinted at it already when I was talking about the family. I look in this in 3 different ways. Brothers and sisters and keepers in medicine, just in our club, the club of medicine, that we have to sort of watch out for each other. And sometimes that's intergenerational, when we're mentors to the younger physicians and things like that, but just a better sense of watching out for each other. That's the one level. The second level has to do with actually when we're called upon to treat a fellow physician. And so that gets more into like secondary prevention, early treatment, to do it that way. And the third has to do with a little bit what you touched on, Jeff, having to do with just keeping well or staying well. When you mentioned, for instance, better work-life balance, that's so important. When I'd have a physician on medical leave who's now ready to return to work part-time, my physician's definition of part-time was 40 hours per week. I said, that ain't my definition, that sort of thing. So that needs to be carefully titrated. The other thing I used to hear so often too, doctors returning to work who have been on a partial leave or a full leave, they're not 100%, they go back to work, but suddenly it's as if they have to return full-time. So many of them would say to me in the first follow-up visit at the end of the first week, I wish I was using a cane. or I was on crutches, because then my colleagues will know that I'm still limping. I'm still on the mend. I need more time, and they will need more time, maybe another 3 to 6 months.
And it's not just our colleagues, it is also our patients to whom we feel a great sense of importance. I just to totally sort of apropos of nothing, this time last year I had a major health crisis. It was a physical health crisis, and I'm not saying that so that I can say, oh, I don't have mental health issues. But what I noticed was my patients were incredibly supportive of me taking time off. And I don't think we should underestimate the supportive nature of our patients. And on that...
Couldn't agree with you more.
Sorry?
I couldn't agree with you more.
Can I also suggest, and so, Jeff, is there a place for, on Crazy Socks for Docs Day, that our patients can wear crazy socks in our support?
There's no reason they can't. No. But
Well, the minister is, look.
I know. In the last few years, I've had more comments from patients wanting to look at my socks. They bring in clips of me in the newspaper. They bring in many things. Said, saw you on the TV the other day. In fact, one guy said, you must have an identical twin. I said, why? I saw some guy on the telly speaking about the black dog. I said, that was me.
So can I just, again, Michael, are we lagging? Have you got any tricks up your sleeve that you're doing in the United States that we're not doing? And if so, what are they? And if you're not, and we're all in this together, what are the systemic changes we need to see?
I think I'm having a little bit of a halo effect because I'm in Australia right now, and I'm just so impressed with so many things that are going on here. And I've been here for the last week in various venues and that. So, the countries are very different. Things are very disparate in the United States because there's so many different regions, and I'm sure that you see it here as well, that things aren't quite the same in parts of Australia than in others. But just in this sort of whole idea of talking about it more, I don't know how you would grade that, but we're doing that as well, but yet we still have a long ways to go. We don't have anything like this, where there's somebody really leading a national, international charge now with something like the Crazy Socks for Docs.
But I suppose we've got to move beyond almost Crazy Socks for Docs, which is reducing the stigma. It still has to happen around, and it's very important to keep it going. They're looking at putting support dogs in hospitals, looking at the fact, and I heard an ad on the way in, that, if you beat up a health professional, you'll be guilty of a crime. These are really systemic, high-level things. We've got to get around, I think, the notion that people don't want to engage with HR. And I suppose, I'm just mindful, we're about to run out of time.
Yeah, access to care.
Access to care. Jeff, Mika, did you have one final quick statement?
Yep, I'll just say that I encourage everyone to keep doing their activities that protect their mental health, but if there is a junior colleague who does raise concerns about his or her mental health, to not ignore those pleas for help. And so I ask hospitals to take seriously when junior doctors are expressing concerns about their health.
And I'd like to say that I think colleges need to work with public hospitals on these issues, because I think the arduous training programs, the hospitals should be a place where you can feel supported, and the college. Jeff, you may have the final word.
Okay. I kind of would echo everything that these two have said. Stigma, access to care, it's often difficult. Like the other thing, accessing care for doctors, is that the consultation is long, and it may not be easily accessed in hours. There are people that are offering it out of hours now. Psychiatrists around town. There's and the recovery is not short. A severe illness takes anywhere between 3 and 12 months. And when I went back to the first time I went back to full-time work, that was a mistake. And I think, like Miko, I had many protective factors. I had lots of protective factors. I could swim and exercise and all those sort of things, but I got crushed, and that wasn't enough.
When we go back to work early, and I think that's not to feel the pressure to go back too early. I want to put a plug for your book, if I may, Michael. It's Why Physicians Die by Suicide. And just for the people here, there are some brochures outside for people to read more about what happens. And, of course, next Friday...
Yeah, next Friday is Crazy Socks for Docs Day, where you put on... It's simple. You just get a pair of coloured socks. I've got Sammy, the dog that co-founded, on one sock, and my other football team, which has got Dusty Martin on the other, mindful of a couple of gifts. And it's easy to tag. Can I give some...
Go ahead.
I need to give some things out.
What are you doing?
I'm giving you some thanks for the presenters.
Hang on. This is unscripted.
Yeah, it's unscripted.
While you're doing that, can I just put a shout out today on Twitter? I noticed there was a fabulous tweet from a member of the nursing profession who said we need to do some of this. This is not, although it's Crazy Socks for Docs Day, it's not just about doctors, it's all health professionals.
That's right.
And I think, and we've got Tony from the ambulance, we've got Matt from the Dental Association. This is industry-wide. We all need to stand together on this one. And I think it's, we just don't want another healthcare professional colleague to die. We've got to stop that.
When we did the launch last year at Peninsula Health, Felicity, my CEO, and I were often stopped in the car park by many other people from, all the other professions in the hospital thanking us for doing it. And as a side, we need to thank you for doing it. You can keep going.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Let's leave that there. Thank you. And I think let's just go right back to the 12th century and listen to Rumi, who actually said, I thought I could change the world, now I'm changing myself. Very clever person back then. I'd like to thank the panel, congratulate Jeff on a fabulous, fabulous cause that we're all supportive of. Don't even have to donate. It's amazing. Thank you very much, and thank you all for taking
Thanks,
time
everybody.
out too.